Yes. So I did a text transform uppercase on the H1, but a text transform none on the spans here. So altogether, I end up with this, so that these are lowercase and these are all caps. And I loaded a font from Google Fonts. We'll look at how to do that here in a little bit, but used a web font to just look a little less generic. So Open Sans for most of the H1, Gentium Book Basic for the little spans. Did a few other things in the style sheet. Used something called Flexbox. Flexbox is a really nice addition to CSS in the last few years. It is pretty well supported, but there's still some browsers hanging around that don't do it quite right. Nearly every browser has at least one bug related to Flexbox. You can look up how to work around those issues. But with enough workarounds, you can use it a lot of places. It works fine on most mobile devices, so that's nice. All right, what else did I do here? Let's start typing stuff in here. We've got, yeah, that's right. Lucas, what's your favorite color? Green, but probably not that green. Probably more of a deep forest green. Looks like a forest green kind of guy. Age, something like 54. Go. Ooh. All right. So I did a little something else with the list. So we used an unordered list with list items before. I've changed it from a UL to a DL. A DL used to be called a definition list in HTML4. Now they call it a description list. This was just based on the way people were actually using it. So inside each LI in a description list, you have two elements. So I have a few pages open related to this right now. Here's the page on MDN, the Mozilla Developer Network. Represents a description list, encloses a list of groups of terms and descriptions. And let's look at some examples. Here's the DL, DT, and DD. So DT, term, DD, description. So since we have our labels and our values inside each of these things, it makes sense to structure them this way. That way, it's a little easier to target, say, just the term. If we want to, say, make it bold, or turn it a different color, or align them a certain way. And you can optionally like wrap both of these things inside a single LI. I did that. You don't have to, but it's allowed. Multiple terms, single description. That works too. Single term, multiple descriptions. Yeah, why not? So it just gives it a slightly different structure. And HTML is about structure. We use CSS to worry about presentation. So to do that, I didn't have to change a whole lot. I just changed render list so that it created a DL. That's the only change to render list. And then in render list item, I still created an LI. And then I created a DT term and a DD description. And then I just set the context or the text content of the term and the inner HTML of the value, which I did because of that color div, right? Which, in order to do it the way we did it, that's the easiest. Now, actually, the fact that the term and description are now in different elements actually makes it easier to avoid using inner HTML. We could have just kept render color just returning the actual div instead of the HTML of the div, and then we could have just used a pinned child here, and that would have been fine. So anyway, that's all I had to change to make this happen. And then I've got some CSS rules for that so that I have my terms all aligned right here and a little thin gutter between those and the descriptions. And what happens if I add more than one? Remind me your name, sir. Yeah, Reed, that's right. Kipping something, right? Kipping something. Kipping what? Kipping Brock. Favorite color? Yeah. It doesn't matter. I mean, you know, you don't have to worry about having the wrong answer. None of us know anyway. He's probably about 15. He's a prodigy. Ooh, there it goes right underneath it. And look, now it's got a slightly different background color. If we add another one, like sedan. Favorite color? You got a favorite color? Yeah. Red? You're sedan, right? Yeah. Age 64. Ooh, now see, we got some stripiness going on here. Just makes it a little easier to tell which one's which as you're looking at a whole list of them. How do we do that trick? This is not primarily a CSS class, but CSS class, that's an overloaded term. This is not a course on CSS primarily, but we can learn a few tricks along the way. So here's what we did. So, not worrying too much about what the rule actually does. Based on the selectors that we learned yesterday, can anyone kind of read that selector in English? Tell me what this is actually matching. Like, for example, I would read this selector as elements with an ID of details. This would be LIs that are children of a DL. So what would this be? That plus is sibling. So altogether what this is saying is an LI that is a sibling, an adjacent sibling, of an LI that is a child of a DL.
So would that only apply to the final list item that you're talking about, or to both?
To all but the first. All but the first. So this would apply to all of them, right? But this would only apply to those that are an adjacent sibling to another one, that immediately follow another LI, which the first one doesn't, right? So that's what the adjacent sibling selector does. It identifies elements that immediately follow another element at the same level of the hierarchy. That way we have a little space in between them, but we don't have empty space at the top. Okay, and then we put some stuff on the term, blah, blah, blah. Ooh, yeah, notice the colon after the term on all of these, but we don't have that colon in our HTML. So we're using a pseudo element here. We won't get real into pseudo elements, but you can read more about them. I think there are some links on the website, or there will be after today. So you can actually add content to an element that isn't even really in the DOM. Crazy stuff. But here's the trick with the background color. Nth of type. So there's the colon is something called a pseudo class. So it's not a class that you actually add to the page with class. It's something like a class that just happens automatically based on what's happening in the DOM. The most common one you'll see probably is hover, colon hover. So when you hover over something, it effectively adds a pseudo class to it temporarily that allows you to target that with CSS. So this nth of type thing, which is relatively new, you can tell it on the even ones, make the background color a little different. So the first one, we don't set any background, so it's just transparent. And then this is white smoke. Snazzy, if I do say so my darn self. All right, questions so far? Without getting too deep into the CSS stuff.